Israel-United States relations. Since the 1960s, the relationship between Israel and the United States has grown into a close alliance in economic, strategic, and military aspects. The U.S. has provided strong support for Israel. It has played a key role in the promotion of good relations between Israel and its neighboring Arab states. In turn, Israel provides a strategic American foothold in the region as well as intelligence and advanced technological partnerships. Relations with Israel are an important factor in the U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. Israel is the largest cumulative recipient of U.S. foreign aid. Up to February 2022, the U.S. had provided Israel $150 billion, non-inflation adjusted, in assistance. 1. The United States' first free trade agreement was with Israel, in 1985. In 1999, the U.S. government signed a commitment to provide Israel with at least $2.7 billion in military aid annually for 10 years. In 2009 it was raised to $3 billion, and in 2019 raised to a minimum of $3.80 billion. Since 1972. The U.S. has also extended loan guarantees to Israel to assist with housing shortages, absorption of new Jewish immigrants and economic recovery. 1. In addition to financial and military aid, the U.S. provides large-scale political support, having used its United Nations Security Council veto power 42 times against resolutions condemning Israel, out of 83 times in which its veto has been used. Between 1991 and 2011, out of the 24 vetoes invoked by the U.S., 15 were used to protect Israel. 3. As of 2021, the United States remains the only permanent member of the United Nations Security Council to have recognized the Golan Heights as non-occupied Israeli sovereign territory, recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and moved its embassy there from Tel Aviv in 2018. 4. Israel is designated by the United States as a major non-NATO ally. Bilateral relations have developed from an early American policy of sympathy and support for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in 1948 to a partnership that connects the United States, a superpower seeking to balance competing interests in the Middle East, with Israel, a small but militarily powerful nation. 5. Late U.S. Senator Jesse Helms argued that the military foothold offered by Israel justifies the expense of American military aid, referring to Israel as America's aircraft carrier in the Middle East. History. First American consulate in Jerusalem, Ottoman Empire, 1857. Support for Zionism among American Jews was minimal, until the involvement of Louis Brandeis in the Federation of American Zionists. 7. Starting in 1912 and the establishment of the Provisional Executive Committee for General Zionist Affairs in 1914, it was empowered by the Zionist organization to deal with all Zionist matters, until better times come. 8. Woodrow Wilson, who was sympathetic to the plight of Jews in Europe and favorable to Zionist objectives, giving his assent to the text of the Balfour Declaration shortly before its release, stated on March 2, 1919, "I am persuaded that the Allied nations with the fullest concurrence of our own government and people are agreed that in Palestine shall be laid the foundation of a future Jewish commonwealth," and on April 16, 1919, corroborated the U.S. government's expressed acquiescence in the Balfour Declaration. 9. Wilson's statements did not result in a change in policy of the U.S. State Department in favor of Zionist aims. However, the U.S. Congress passed the Lodge Fish Resolution, 10, the first joint resolution stating its support for the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, on September 21, 1922. 11. 12. The same day, the Mandate of Palestine was approved by the Council of the League of Nations. During World War II, while U.S. foreign policy decisions were often ad hoc moves and solutions dictated by the demands of the war, the Zionist movement made a fundamental departure from traditional Zionist policy and its stated goals. At the Biltmore Conference in May 1942, 13, previous stated policy towards establishing a Jewish national home in Palestine were gone. These were replaced with its new policy, that Palestine be established as a Jewish commonwealth, like other nations, in cooperation with the United States, not Britain. 14. Two attempts by Congress in 1944 to pass resolutions declaring U.S. government support for the establishment of a Jewish state in Palestine were objected to by the Departments of War and State, because of wartime considerations and Arab opposition to the creation of a Jewish state. The resolutions were permanently dropped. 15. Following the war, the new post-war era witnessed an intensive involvement of the United States in the political and economic affairs of the Middle East, in contrast to the hands-off attitude characteristic of the pre-war period. In Truman's administration, the United States had to face and define its policy in all three sectors that provided the root causes of American interests in the region: the Soviet threat, the birth of Israel, and petroleum. 16. Israeli Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion meeting with U.S. Representatives Franklin D. Roosevelt Jr. and John F. Kennedy in 1951. The United States was the first country to recognize the State of Israel on May 14, 1948. 17. Recognition of the State of Israel. Telegram on recognition of the State of Israel, May 1948. Previous American presidents, although encouraged by active support from members of the American and world Jewish communities, as well as domestic civic groups, labor unions, and political parties, supported the Jewish homeland concept, alluded to in Britain's 1917 Balfour Declaration, they officially continued to acquiesce. Throughout the Roosevelt and Truman administrations, the Departments of War and State recognized the possibility of a Soviet-Arab connection and the potential Arab restriction on oil supplies to the U.S., and advised against U.S. intervention on behalf of the Jews. 18. With continuing conflict in the area and worsening humanitarian conditions among Holocaust survivors in Europe, on November 29, 1947, and with U.S. support, the United Nations General Assembly adopted as Resolution 181, the United Nations Partition Plan for Palestine, which recommended the adoption and implementation of a plan of partition with economic union. 19. The voting was heavily lobbied by Zionist supporters, which Truman himself later noted. 20. And rejected by the Arabs. President Truman meeting on May 8, 1951, with Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion, right, and Abba Eban, center. As the end of the mandate approached, the decision to recognize the Jewish state remained contentious, with significant disagreement between President Truman, his domestic and campaign advisor, Clark Clifford, and both the State Department and Defense Department. Truman, while sympathetic to the Zionist cause, was most concerned about relieving the plight of the displaced persons. Secretary of State George Marshall feared U.S. backing of a Jewish state would harm relations with the Muslim world, limit access to Middle Eastern oil, and destabilize the region. On May 12, 1948, Truman met in the Oval Office with Secretary of State Marshall, Undersecretary of State Robert A. Lovett, Counsel to the President Clark Clifford, and several others to discuss the Palestine situation. Clifford argued in favor of recognizing the new Jewish state in accordance with the partition resolution. Marshall opposed Clifford's arguments, contending that they were based on domestic political considerations in the election year. Marshall said that, if Truman followed Clifford's advice and recognized the Jewish state, then he would vote against Truman in the election. Truman did not clearly state his views in the meeting. 21. 2 days later, on May 14, 1948, the United States, under Truman, became the first country to extend any form of recognition. This happened within hours of the Jewish People's Council gathering at the Tel Aviv Museum and David Ben-Gurion declaring the establishment of a Jewish state in Eretz Israel, to be known as the State of Israel. The phrase, in Eretz Israel, is the only place in the declaration of the establishment of the State of Israel containing any reference to the location of the new state. 22. The text of the communication from the Provisional Government of Israel to Truman was as follows. My dear Mr. President, I have the honor to notify you that the State of Israel has been proclaimed as an independent republic within frontiers approved by the General Assembly of the United Nations in its resolution of November 29, 1947, and that a provisional government has been charged to assume the rights and duties of government for preserving law and order within the boundaries of Israel, for defending the state against external aggression, and for discharging the obligations of Israel to the other nations of the world in accordance with international law. The Act of Independence will become effective at 1 minute after 6 o'clock on the evening of May 14, 1948, Washington time. With full knowledge of the deep bond of sympathy which has existed and has been strengthened over the past 30 years between the government of the United States and the Jewish people of Palestine, I have been authorized by the provisional government of the new state to tender this message and to express the hope that your government will recognize and will welcome Israel into the community of nations.